Oversight and Investigations will now come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on examining the Trump administration's work combating transnational cartels in Indian country. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at the hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking members. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank the witnesses on both our panels, especially those who have traveled here to be from far away for testimony before this committee today. Last Congress, this subcommittee held 2 hearings to shine light on the devastating consequences of the Biden's border crisis has had on tribal communities. Because of the Biden-Harris administration's leftist open border policies, international crime cartels infiltrated Indian country. This led to the mass trafficking of not just drugs, but people, including indigenous people, and untold violence. Since March of 2024, transnational criminal organizations, including citizens of Sonora, Mexico, have burglarized trains throughout my home state of Arizona. On March 27, 2025, a vehicle suspected of a train robbery was pulled over by the Wallapai Nation police. But the illegal alien driver attempted to drive off and actually struck the tribal officer with the vehicle. Fortunately, the officer sustained only minor injuries. But who's next? I introduced H.R. 4092, the Protect Rail Act, to make these aliens admissible and deportable for certain crimes related to the theft of goods being transported as interstate commerce. Criminal illegal aliens have no place on tribal lands. During our previous hearing, we heard firsthand testimony from tribal leaders and law enforcement officers about terror these cartels inflict upon their communities. Tribal community leaders spoke at length about establishment of fentanyl trafficking hubs and the presence of cartel thugs on tribal reservations. Worse yet, tribal community leaders shared their heartbreaking fears of cartel agents retaliating directly against them, their families, and their friends, with violence and even murder for just as much as speaking against the cartels operating in Indian country. The mere presence of tribal witnesses at our previous hearings and here today is an act of bravery and defiance against criminal cartels allowed to wreak havoc by the Biden administration's failed border policies. Fortunately, from the very first day of his second term, President Trump has stood up and taken concrete steps to end the Biden border madness and eradicate cartels from the tribal communities in the United States. For example, on January 20th, President Trump took an executive action to declare a national emergency at the southern border to stop the bleeding caused by the Biden administration's guarantee the state's protection against the criminal migrant invasion and to secure our southern border. Moreover, President Trump finally designated cartels and other criminal organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists, showing that unlike President Biden, who opened up our borders and allowing the criminals to flow into our country unchecked, President Trump recognized the existential harm that these transnational cartels impose on our tribal communities. By officially designating these cartels as what they truly are, foreign terrorist organizations that attack our citizens, introduce addictive and deadly drugs like fentanyl into our communities, and terrorize Indian country from the southern border as far north as the Dakotas and Montana, all for greed and profit. These cartels bring members of our tribal communities under their harmful influence by introducing highly addictive drugs to them for free, sometimes even drugging unknowing victims. Once these victims are hooked, cartels are then they'll be forced to serve as foot soldiers, peddling drugs to others to pay for their building drug debts and continuing that ugly cycle. Fortunately, under President Trump, the massive flow of drugs from our southern border has slowed. Southwest border encounters are at an all-time low. Drug seizure statistics have improved, and overdose deaths, particularly in Indian country, have decreased. Gang members from the cartels and the gangs like Trinidad and MS-13 have been charged, indicted, convicted, and sentenced. Other gang members have fled the United States with their tails between their legs. In just 7 months, President Trump has finally secured our southern border. And with the passing of One Big Beautiful Bill Act, Congress has secured $165 billion in funding to ensure that our southern border is once again a border. Law enforcement is properly equipped to prevent human and drug trafficking, and our tribal communities are protected from terrorist cartels. To be clear, the war against terrorism cartels and the criminal organizations in Indian country and on federal lands is not over. Rather, it is just beginning. Now that the Biden border crisis is behind us, we can work towards eradicating the cartels, allowing tribal communities to thrive. My Republican colleagues and I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses about the impact of President Trump's actions in tribal communities and to learn more about concrete next steps we can take to further protect Indian country. Thank you, and once again, I appreciate everybody showing up, and now I recognize Ranking Member Dexter for her opening statements.
Thank you very much to the chair and to our witnesses for joining us today. This is our fourth hearing on this topic in this subcommittee in recent years. When Democrats were in the majority, we held a hearing to understand the opioid crisis and what the federal government should do to address it. Since then, Republicans have used these hearings as a platform to talk about the border. In each of the hearings, tribal leaders told the subcommittee in clear terms that in order to combat the cartels and the damage they do in Native communities, they need the federal funding they were promised as part of the United States trust and treaty obligations. That means real investment in law enforcement. That means real investment in addiction treatment services. What did they get from Republicans and Trump in return for coming to Washington, D.C. to testify about the crises in their communities? Proposal after proposal to take away their funding instead of giving them more of it. Here's just a few examples. DOJ is closing 12 Indian Health Services offices and facilities across the country. Closures that tribal officials warn would worsen health disparities for Native Americans. Bureau of Indian Affairs Public Safety and Justice is funded at just under 13% of total need. An additional 25,655 personnel are required to adequately service Indian country. The Trump administration's 2026 budget proposal requests a $900 million cut in funding for the Indian Health Service, which is already deeply underfunded. The IHS provides essential addiction treatment programs throughout Indian nations. The Trump administration's proposal fiscal year 2026 budget requests a 35% reduction in funding for the high-intensity drug trafficking area program, a program that assists tribal communities in reducing drug trafficking. There is never a good time to defund the tribes that are trying to fight off the cartels, but doing it now is unconscionable. The fentanyl crisis in the United States is one of the most urgent public health emergencies in recent years, and its impact on Indian country is especially severe. The fentanyl that's being trafficked on tribal lands is killing staggering numbers of people on Indian nations, tearing families apart, upending lives, and tragically adding to the historical trauma that is already embedded in these nations. Addressing addiction to fentanyl is achievable. For the first time since the 1970s, the United States is experiencing a decline in overdose deaths. We have seen a 26.8% decrease in nationwide overdose deaths from February of 2024 to February of 2025. A primary reason for that is the expanded federal investments in public health programs and the work of harm reduction groups who are using naloxone or Narcan, an antidote to overdose, to save lives. But while the national picture may be improving, we know that tribal communities are still being disproportionately harmed. According to the CDC, in both 2022 and 2023, the age-adjusted rate of drug overdose deaths was highest for American Indian and Alaska Native people compared to any other racial demographic in the country. The treatment and prevention programs run by tribes are effective and cost-efficient. I'm grateful to our witness, Chairman Anthony Hillaire of the Lummi Nation, who will help us learn about how with federal investments, community members can receive effective treatment for fentanyl addiction. Treatment can give people their lives back and what can ultimately save them. But it won't happen with hollow tariff threats and showy executive orders that give law enforcement authorities things that they mostly already had. Narcan isn't free. Neither is talented, caring staff at clinics, or tribal law enforcement officers who frequently get paid less than their peers at state and local law enforcement offices. It requires funding, and funding our nation promised Indian nations in treaties. We have the money to meet their needs. If my Republican colleagues can find the money to give budget-busting tax breaks to their billionaire friends, surely they can find a fraction of that to help tribal nations with their fentanyl and sex trafficking crises, particularly when they invite tribal leaders to DC to talk to us about these problems. There are law enforcement jurisdictional changes that Indian nations need to help address cartels, and some do not involve new funds. I think we should see if there is a way for us to work together to address these requests. But until we address the massive funding shortfall, Indian nations will continue to struggle. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady and now recognize the full committee chairman, Mr. Westerman, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar, and thank you to the witnesses being here today. Nobody can accuse the Natural Resources Committee of not being a hardworking committee. We had a full committee 4-hour hearing earlier today. There's another committee meeting down in 1324 that I was just at, and we've got this oversight hearing here today. And it's all very important issues, and I think it shows just how many things this committee impacts. And this is, to me, one of the most important things that we can look at. And, you know, when we look at our witnesses today, they come not only from the Departments of Interior and Justice, but also from tribal communities across the country. And again, I want to thank you all for being here. Last year, this subcommittee held hearings about how tribal nations were under constant threat from foreign criminal cartels. It's hard to imagine here in the homeland. We even heard from tribal leaders who had their lives threatened for daring to speak up against the dangers they were fighting in their own communities. That's unfathomable. On his first day in office, President Trump signed Executive Order 14157, designating cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations, and specifically designated global terrorists, identifying these criminal cartels, which were previously empowered through open border policies, as foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs, and it gives our law enforcement agencies additional tools to combat the mayhem these criminals have inflicted around the country, and particularly in tribal communities. For example, these FTO designations block cartels and their affiliates from accessing the U.S. financial system, prohibit anyone from transacting with or providing material support to cartels, and empower the U.S. to investigate, prosecute, and sanction FTO cartels anywhere in the world. These terrorist criminals have no place left to hide from the long arm of the law. Although President Trump began his second term only 6 months ago, the effectiveness of his policies are already clear and actually quite astounding. Compared to the Biden administration's illegal migrant crossings are down by 99.99%. Encounters with gotaways are down by 95%, and daily border encounters are down by 93%. Fentanyl trafficking at the southern border has fallen by 54%. 1,500 kilograms of fentanyl, more than enough to kill 750 million people, have been seized. That tells us there's still a lot of work to do. Over 6,000 drug traffickers and 151,000 illegal aliens have been arrested since January 20th. Thousands of FTO cartel and gang members have fled the United States. This most secure border in modern American history means more secure and safer tribal communities. During our prior hearings, witnesses testified to jurisdictional confusion among law enforcement agencies under President Biden, and to the need for increased federal, state, local, and tribal coordination to eliminate the cartel presence in Indian country. Just this month, the joint DEA and BIA task force targeted armed individuals and drug traffickers on Yakima Nation Reservation, seizing 7,100 pounds of marijuana, 336 pounds of methamphetamine, nearly 25 pounds of cocaine, 7 pounds of fentanyl powder, 4,700 fentanyl-laced pills, $22,512 in drug proceeds, and 12 firearms. Through this interagency work, the DEA and BIA were able to disrupt the flow of drugs first from Mexico to eastern Washington and then to Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. This type of interagency collaboration to combat the spread of these drugs and crime in tribal communities is just getting started. With new border security funding in the recently passed One Big Beautiful Bill Act and new tools unlocked by President Trump designating cartels as FTOs, the time has come for law enforcement agencies to forcefully confront the drugs and violence that accompany cartel presence in tribal communities. Again, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the progress we've made so far under President Trump and congressional Republican leadership, and about the further actions we can take to ensure that tribal communities are protected from these nefarious operations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now ask unanimous consent the following members be allowed to sit and participate in today's hearing. Ms. Hageman of Wyoming, Mr. Hurd of Colorado, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Downing of Montana, Mr. Baumgartner of Washington, and Mr. Crane of Arizona. Without objection, so ordered. I will now introduce our first panel of witnesses. First, we have Mr. Charles Addington, Principal Director of the Justice Services and Law Enforcement for Indian Affairs, U.S. Department of Interior, Washington, D.C. Our second one is Mr. Justin Garris, Acting Section Chief, Violent Crimes Unit, Federal Bureau of Investigations, Washington, D.C. We have a system here where you have 5 minutes. You'll see that when you turn on your mic, it'll turn green. When you see it turn yellow, you got 1 minute. And if it turns red, you gotta wrap it up. But remember, your whole conversation will be in the record. So with that, I'll now recognize Mr. Addington for his first 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Chairman, ranking members, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Charles Addington. I am an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation and currently serve as the Principal Director of Justice Services and Law Enforcement for the Indian Affairs at the U.S. Department of Interior. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the U.S. Department of Interior regarding the examination of the Trump administration's work combating transnational cartels in Indian country. Most illicit drugs available throughout Indian country are not manufactured on the reservations, but rather transported into Indian country by independent dealers who travel to nearby cities to purchase these drugs, primarily from associates of well-organized Mexican drug trafficking organizations. We have heard tribal leaders and citizens express grave concern regarding illegal drug activity occurring within many reservations across the nation. Stories of fentanyl being introduced into tribal communities and their citizens being poisoned or having an overdose on these very deadly drugs. We know fentanyl manufactured by Mexican cartels is the main driver behind the ongoing epidemic of drug overdoses in the United States. Fentanyl is being distributed in numerous forms, such as a powder or hidden in other powder drugs such as cocaine, heroin, or in fake prescription pills. When hidden in other drugs, users often take these drugs without knowing they contain fentanyl, which greatly increases the risk of an overdose from ingestion or simply through unprotected contact with this daily drug. Most of these fake pills are made to look nearly identical to real prescription pills, such as Percocet, Vicodin, Xanax, and the fentanyl content of these fake pills can only be determined after being analyzed by a laboratory. Abuse of these powerful substances often lead to severely impaired behavior, increasing the risk of violence, criminal activity, and even death. Drug abuse is one of the primary contributing factors to increased violence toward women and children and diminishing sense of overall community safety. So what are we doing to address this problem? Over the past few months, the department has begun to work at returning the enhancing past successful initiatives such as our DOI opioid task forces and our mobile enforcement team operations, along with strengthening partnerships with our FBI, DEA, tribal, and state local law enforcement partners. These partnerships will allow us to employ a force multiplier approach and better share intelligence across agencies in our effort to combat illicit drugs in our tribal communities. The BIA Office of Justice Services maintains a specialized National Drug Enforcement Division, which is the largest nationwide network of drug enforcement agents dedicated solely to Indian country that are specifically designed to investigate the distribution of illegal narcotics in Indian country. Through the BIA Division of Drug Enforcement, We have already begun conducting numerous successful enforcement actions to attack the cartels' drug trafficking in Indian Country. Just one example, last month during a traffic stop by a BIA drug enforcement canine officer on Interstate 40 within the Laguna Pueblo Reservation in New Mexico. The canine officer located drug paraphernalia and Xanax pills in the front passenger area of the car, and in the trunk, the officer discovered a large black duffel bag containing a substantial quantity of blue pills. Field tests later confirmed the pills as fentanyl, with a gross weight of 122.22 pounds, equating to approximately 504,140 pills with a street value of approximately $20 million. Another example, our BIA drug enforcement staff actively supported the DEA Operation Overdrive initiative by conducting a simultaneous deployment operation within the exterior boundaries of and with a nexus to the Yakima Indian Reservation in Washington. Drug agents reported averaging approximately 20 overdoses a month at an incorporated city located within the exterior boundaries of the Yakima Indian Reservation prior to them conducting the joint operation. This operation netted multiple federal arrests and the seizure of more than $44 million in illegal narcotics and real property. At the end of the operation, only one overdose was reported. Although one overdose is still too many, federal efforts to partner with other law enforcement agencies to conduct these types of operations are showing great success in reducing the potential number of senseless overdoses within Indian Country. As you can see from just these two recent examples, the department is working closely with our federal, tribal, and state partners to disrupt and dismantle these drug cartels, supplying our tribal communities with these dangerous drugs and preying on our most vulnerable citizens. Although we're seeing success with our operations and partnerships, there is much more work for all of us to do. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the department, and I look forward to continued work together to improve public safety in Indian Country, and we'll be happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Atching. I now recognize Mr. Garris for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Gosar, Ranking Member Dexter, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me here today to discuss the FBI's work combating cartels in Indian Country. My name is Justin Garris, and I'm a section chief in the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Criminal Investigative Division. As a criminal investigative division, oversees all FBI matters related to Indian Country. I have more than 15 years of law enforcement experience, which has included working counterintelligence and terrorism matters, in addition to my current role in violent crime. The Bureau is deeply committed to dismantling violent criminal networks in Indian Country, using an intelligence-driven, victim-centered approach. Through multi-agency task forces, information sharing, and close coordination with tribal law enforcement, we're disrupting drug and weapons trafficking, seizing illicit proceeds, and bringing violent offenders to justice. The FBI has jurisdiction specific to Indian Country, which gives us investigative responsibility for violent crimes committed on many of the federally recognized Indian reservations across the country. We share that with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and conduct investigations alongside our partners at the federal, state, local, and tribal levels. To help combat criminal threats in Indian Country, the FBI uses all tools and authorities at our disposal. The creation of the Homeland Security Task Forces, or HSTFs, stemming from the administration's executive order on protecting the American people against invasion, play a critical role in disrupting transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, in crimes like drug and weapons trafficking, money laundering, and kidnapping. It helps expand our reach by improving real-time intelligence sharing and targeting threats at every level. The Foreign Terrorist Organization designation is another powerful tool in the FBI's fight against cartels, enabling DOJ to pursue terrorism-related prosecutions, including material support to terrorism charges. Currently, the FBI has approximately 20 active Indian Country crimes investigations with validated transnational organized crime connections, and around 270 additional drug-related cases still being investigated for a TCO crime connection. The FBI's Criminal Investigative Division also closely collaborates with Mexican law enforcement and many federal, state, and local agencies to target the flow of drugs into Indian country. In February 2025, the Rocky Mountain Safe Trails Task Force in Colorado arrested 3 individuals, 2 of who were illegal migrants, for operating a methamphetamine operation on a reservation. One of the individuals is believed to have ties to a Mexican TCO. To fully understand the scope of the threat, it's important to examine where the investigations are happening. With 31 field offices holding Indian country jurisdiction, over 95% of FBI Indian country criminal investigations are handled out of the following 10 field offices: Albuquerque, Denver, Detroit, Minneapolis, Oklahoma City, Omaha, Portland, Phoenix, Seattle, and Salt Lake City. Currently, there are more than 350 full-time FBI employees supporting Indian country matters, including more than 250 special agents, 14 intelligence analysts, and 85 professional staff, which includes more than 40 victim specialists providing critical assistance to those affected by crimes. We can also often surge additional support to Indian country investigations when needed. Additionally, there are more than 500 task force officers working these investigations alongside us. In the past 2 years, the FBI has also expanded its presence in Indian country by adding 45 additional agents and 4 new task forces. Launched in 2023, Operation Not Forgotten has supported 500 Indian country violent crime investigations by surging resources during a 3-month period. This year, it expanded to a 6-month deployment across multiple field offices and currently involves a surge of over 60 special agents and analysts to the program. These partnerships are producing real results. In Washington State last month, the FBI and our partners in and around the Yakima Reservation worked together on an investigation that resulted in the seizure of approximately 220 pounds of methamphetamine and 9 kilograms of cocaine, the largest seizure ever recorded at this reservation, with an estimated street value of $500,000. In closing, I want to reiterate the FBI's unwavering commitment to this mission is a top priority. We appreciate the committee's interest and for your support in our ongoing efforts to disrupt and dismantle these criminal networks, and your commitment to bringing justice to those in Indian country. Together, we are building stronger, safer communities. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Garris. Now we're going to take questions from the dais, and we're going to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Westerman, for his questions. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to the witnesses for being here today. And not only thank you for being here, but thank you for the incredible, outstanding work that you and your colleagues are doing. The statistics and the data that we're seeing now are truly unprecedented and amazing, the way that you're cracking down on these drug cartels. Mr. Addington, in your testimony, you mentioned a recent seizure in New Mexico where agents were able to successfully take over 500,000 fentanyl pills and take those off the streets. Oh, can you explain what does that represent in terms of potential lives lost, lives that were saved? Just to put that in perspective for everyone in the room.
Thank you for that question. Yes, a lethal dose of fentanyl is about 2 milligrams, which is equates to about 10 to 15 grains of table salt. So it's a very small amount. So for example, if just half of these pills would have contained a lethal dose of fentanyl, it would have had the capabilities of killing about 13 million people.
It's unreal. I know we were looking at statistics just a year ago where we were losing about 300 Americans a day to fentanyl overdoses. And think about a large airliner crashing every day, and really there wasn't a lot being done to stop that. But what is the Department of the Interior doing today or considering doing in the next year or two that wasn't being done last year to get those successful results?
So what we've started doing is we put more focus back on utilizing intelligence-led policing in our resource allocation. So enhancing, utilizing our specialized units like our Division of Drug Enforcement, our Missing and Murdered Unit. So we have those specialized units that can target violent crime and illegal drug activity. So Instead of just kind of putting people out there saying, here, go do the job, we're actually doing analysis of what's going on, identify the problem, say, okay, where's the crime happening, what's happening, what time of day, what day of the week, and then we put those resources, do crime reduction plans, and then put resources to address those problems. That's how we make the community safer, and that's what we're focusing on now.
Thank you. I've been to the border many times. I know, especially on the Arizona border, about, I believe, 60% of the Arizona border is federal lands. A lot of that is Indian country. Is most of your work happening in that area? I mean, it's vast and remote, and I know there's problems getting access to it. What are some of the challenges you're facing as far as access, and how could we help with that?
So yes, Tohono O'odham Reservation has 75 miles of border along the Mexican border. So we do have some drug enforcement agents that's assigned down there, the BIE drug enforcement agents. We also have the Tohono O'odham Police Department. It's a tribally operated police department. They have a really good task force down there that works really well with HSI, with DEA. So we all put our resources together down there, and that's how we
Are you
make
still
it.
having to be on foot or on horseback, or can you have wheeled vehicles in there?
Well, so it's a really rural area, so there's a couple different things that's going on down there. So we have a lot of four-wheelers that come through the area, but we also still have backpackers that come across that's transporting drugs across the border. So we do operations with backpackers that's walking across the border, and then we also do operations with vehicles, with drones, utilizing Customs and Border Patrol helicopters and those kind of things to do operations down there. So a partnership is how we make a difference down there.
Thank you. Mr. Garris, we know that cartels have taken advantage of tribal communities and exploited their most vulnerable populations. How has President Trump's actions, for example, the executive order designating international cartels as foreign terrorist organizations and specifically designated global terrorists, been implemented at the agency level? And what additional tools do you think that gives you at the FBI to go after these criminals?
Thank you, sir. So I believe the new executive order is a game changer for law enforcement partners, but I'm going to speak on behalf of the FBI and the fact that we're able to put individuals on the watch list under the terrorist designation, whether it's known suspected terrorist, as well as with the creation of the Homeland Security Task Force, which is currently in its infancy, but having a whole government approach to target the cartels and transnational criminal organizations is priceless. We're able to consolidate all law enforcement and intelligence efforts into one approach, one targeted approach. We're eliminating duplicative investigative cases, and we're able to, basically one team, one fight, go after them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I yield back, I would say this is something that we as a country should celebrate, that we're getting more of these illegal drugs and off of the street, and we're getting these cartels out of the country. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, is now recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. The fentanyl crisis fueled by transnational cartels has devastated our tribal communities. This should not be a partisan issue, and we can all agree that our tribal communities deserve better. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's actions have not reflected that. In March, DOJ and the Trump administration closed 12 Indian Health Service offices and facilities across the country, which will worsen health disparities for tribal communities. While that's the topic at hand today, I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity to address a topic that is top of mind for so many Americans while we have a witness from the FBI in front of us. Since day one of his presidency, Donald Trump has shown that he has absolutely no regard for the rule of law. In fact, one of his first actions as president was pardoning over 1,500 violent insurrectionists who invaded the Capitol on January 6th. At the Department of Justice, we've seen hundreds of career employees fired for politically motivated reasons, including attorneys who worked under Special Counsel Jack Smith as part of the investigation into President Trump, and others who worked on the prosecutions of January 6 defendants. Most recently, the administration dismissed federal prosecutor Maureen Comey, who had worked on high-profile cases such as those of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. These firings show an extremely concerning pattern of the president retaliating against the Justice Department officials who were involved in cases the president was personally connected to. Mr. Garris, it was reported recently that FBI agents reviewing the Epstein files for potential release had been instructed to flag any documents relating to Epstein's case that made any mention of Donald Trump. Yes or no, are you aware of any such directive firsthand or by media accounts?
My apologies, ma'am. I am not privy to any of that information.
Have you heard about this via media accounts or any such directive? Are you aware of this?
I saw something in one of the media outlets, and that's about the extent.
And yes or no, in your career at the FBI, have you ever experienced such a directive to scrub politically sensitive materials from a high-profile case?
Negative from my end, ma'am.
Yes or no, are you aware of any other directives given to FBI staff regarding the president's involvement in the Epstein case or other ongoing investigations?
That's a negative from my end, ma'am.
And at his confirmation hearing in January, Director Kash Patel stated that the FBI must be independent, that's his quote, and pledged that the Bureau's work would not be influenced by political considerations. Yes or no, would such a directive be consistent with the statements made by Director Patel?
Can you repeat that?
So the director of your agency said that the FBI must be independent.
Oh.
And as we mentioned, there have been accounts of a directive being made to leadership at the FBI to scrub any materials that may mention President Trump as part of the Epstein files. Would such a directive that I understand you've heard about through media accounts but haven't personally experienced, would that be in conflict with the director's intention for the agency that the FBI's work must be independent of political motivations?
It would be in conflict, but I can tell you, as FBI agents, and I know Director Patel, we uphold the Constitution and we protect our communities. Those are two things we excel at with our partners.
That's great to hear. So lastly, yes or no, in your preparation for this hearing, did you receive any direction, request, or suggestion regarding the Epstein files?
Negative, ma'am.
And just finally want to remind you that under federal law, it's a crime to knowingly and willfully conceal something from or make a false statement to Congress. So just want to make sure you have no clarification to your response.
No issues, ma'am. And I swore an oath as a Marine, too, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
I'm really, really glad to hear that, that the Trump administration hasn't interfered with your work at the FBI. We have heard that thousands of employees, and specifically the people investigating the Epstein case, are facing unacceptable levels of political interference from the highest levels. It's outrageous, and you may know that this week Republican leadership is canceling votes to conceal the truth here. I appreciate you answering the questions. We'll continue to demand full release of these files so that the American people can see what Donald Trump is hiding behind. Thank you, and I yield back.
Lady yields. The gentlelady from Wyoming is now recognized for her 5 minutes.
You know, this is one of the most serious issues we've dealt with since I've been in Congress, the Mexican drug cartels moving in on our reservations. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to review the testimony that has been provided over the last couple of years with this subcommittee. We've had 2 different hearings. I want to apologize to everyone in this room that this has devolved into focusing on something related to Jeffrey Epstein rather than the very serious issues that are before us in our efforts to protect our tribal members from the absolute catastrophe of the Biden administration's open border policies. We have heard about drug trafficking, human trafficking, drug smuggling. We have heard about addictions that are just, that make you cry as you sit here and listen to it. None of it has anything to do with the Epstein files or President Trump, but it has everything to do with protecting our tribal members and our communities from the scourge of violence related to the Mexican drug cartels. Mr. Garris, last year I questioned then Attorney General Garland about the DOJ's work to counter the cartel threat on tribal reservations. And I can tell you that it would be an understatement to say that I was disappointed in his response or the DOJ's efforts to protect our tribal members and reservations under his watch. In response to the testimony from tribes about this safety concern on their lands, Mr. Garland actually had the audacity to testify that this issue was Congress's fault and that the DOJ needed more money. Yet your testimony this afternoon covers several new task forces and policies that are helping to counter this threat. It seems then that this is one of policy and enforcement. Would you agree with me?
I would agree. I think more resources, with more resources, we could do more too, ma'am.
But Mr. Addington, we also know that the issue of tribal law enforcement is a very complex one. There are challenges with jurisdiction, recruitment, retention, and more. What is the BIA doing to address these longstanding issues which exacerbate the cartel presence on tribal reservations?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, what we're currently doing is examining our hiring practices right now to make sure we can get more boots on the ground. As you know, Indian country law enforcement staffing our agencies has been a problem for many, many years. So we're trying to streamline the process to get more boots on the ground right now to address having more people addressing these problems is one of the things that we're focused on right now, as well as using the resources that we have and putting intelligence-led policing to work. Using the resources we have to better work smarter, not harder. So when we do that, we make a bigger difference. As you can see from some of the operations that we've done,
That's right.
We're seeing success when we use the resources that we currently have and not having to, continue to come up with new things to do, but just use the things that we have, we can make a difference.
Okay, and I understand that both of you are making a commitment that this is a significant issue for you, and you are going to do everything that you can to protect our tribal communities. Is that fair?
That is absolutely correct.
Thank you. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General released a report earlier this year which confirmed that the Biden administration lost track of over 330,000 unaccompanied migrant children, or UACs, over the last 4 years. Both Mr. Addington and Mr. Garris, do we have any reason to believe that some of these UACs are on the reservations where the cartels operate as part of smuggling and trafficking chains or for other purposes? Have we been able to do any investigation related to whether we have UACs on these reservations?
From the standpoint of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we haven't got any intelligence to lead to us to believe that they are there, but we do, when we're working these human trafficking operations, they could be some of the people that we're looking for. We don't know that until we actually work the operations and start digging into where some of the victims come from.
So were you aware of the fact that the Inspector General found that the Biden administration lost over 330,000 children that were brought across the border illegally? Were you aware of that fact?
Yes.
Okay, and so it's something that is on your radar that you need to be addressing as you're considering this specific issue in relation to the cartels moving in on our reservations.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, thank you. I guess that I'm going to be out of time. I very much appreciate the dedication that both of you bring to this issue. It is extremely important to this community and to this committee and to this Congress, and we appreciate what resources you are putting towards this. It is important for our tribal members and our reservations, our fellow citizens, so thank you.
I think the gentlewoman from Wyoming, the gentlewoman from Oregon is now recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much. Mr. Addington, as I'm sure you know, the federal government has trust and treaty obligations that require us to meet the economic and social needs of tribal and Native Americans. Yet the President's fiscal year 2026 discretionary budget request suggests a number of recommended cuts to reach balance and restore confidence in America's fiscal management. These cuts will impact tribal communities. With the federal government's obligations in mind, I'm going to ask you a few questions. First, are you familiar with this February 2024 report from your office, report to Congress on spending, staffing, and estimated funding costs for public safety and justice programs in Indian Country 2021?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
fabulous. This report has the latest available data on public safety and justice needs in Indian Country. Are you aware of how much the total need was covered?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
And what was that?
It was about $2 billion
Okay.
for law enforcement.
And so that's about 13%. Is that accurate?
I believe that is the number that was provided, yes.
So 13% of the need was funded. So only 13% of the funding needs were met. And at that time, the report indicates that an additional 25,655 personnel were needed to adequately service Indian Country. Do you think that that level of funding is sufficient to keep cartels off of tribal lands and to end the dangerous flow of fentanyl into our tribal nation communities?
I think the amount of funding that we have available to us to work with, as long as we prioritize the funding that we have and do the things that I talked about earlier about utilizing those resources to the best of our ability, I think we can make a big difference in addressing the cartels that's affecting Indian Country.
And I think what you're articulating is something we hear frequently from our tribal nation partners, that we do less with more. We're good at that, but that's not necessarily what any of us should be expecting. In fact, isn't it fair to say that the lack of law enforcement on tribal lands is a serious impediment to the fight against fentanyl?
Well, so prior to me coming back to work for the federal government, I run a tribal law enforcement program for the last 4 years. So I am very familiar on the tribal side as well as on the federal government side. And I can tell you that we was able to, on the tribal side of the house, we were able to meet our needs because we had to get creative with coming up with resources, just as the same thing as the state or local departments do. So we was able to meet our needs, and I think anyone that you talk to, even the counties, the cities, everyone could always say, you know, additional resources are needed.
Understood.
But we have to work within what we're given, and that's what we're doing. We're prioritizing our funding and making sure that we meet those needs.
I totally understand that, and I also know from judiciary at the state of Oregon that there is a discordant amount of investment in training and other investments in our tribal law enforcement partners than there are in even those state and local ones. So it's surprising to see that the president's current budget recommends a cut of $107 million to the tribal law enforcement program from the scant needs or needs being met that you've already discussed. So it's suggested that redundancies and inefficiencies were present. Is that your understanding? Do you believe that that just redundant services are being cut with that $107 million cut?
There is areas where we can improve and reallocate or reprioritize programs to make sure that we're getting the most out of them, because you know, public safety in any country is a top priority of the department. So we're looking at those to make sure that we're meeting our basic core functions. So that's what we're looking at doing.
Understood, and I know that this is a challenging position to be in, but your report suggested we were only funding at 13%. Now we're cutting another $107 million. So I would argue that we continue to underperform and just not meet our treaty obligations there. In the last 21 seconds that we have, would you elevate the top issue that you think tribal nation law enforcement needs to be able to really address the fentanyl addiction crisis on tribal lands from a law enforcement perspective?
I think being able to recruit and retain staff is the very number one thing you hear from, not only from the BIA side of the house, but tribal law enforcement as well. It depends on where you go. I just ran a tribal law enforcement program. I didn't have problems with retaining staff at the program where I ran. I had 20 people sitting in the pipe that wanted to go to work there. But you go to other places where it's more rural and they don't have some of the things that they need there. It's hard to recruit people there because, you know, there's no housing. You just can't get people. I think boots on the ground is the number one thing that you need. And if you can't even fill the positions that you have, it's hard to address any problem. And just same thing with the BIA. If I can't fill funded positions that I have. You can throw all the resources at me. If I can't fill those, I can't make a difference.
Understood. Thank you. I recognize I went over. I just want to ask to submit this to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you,
The
Mr.
gentleman
Chair.
from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my intention to leave a couple of minutes to yield to you at the end, so be ready for that, sir,
Okay.
if you're able. Mr. Garris, I want to come to you. As you probably remember, recently a woman was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for her part in helping Mexican drug cartels develop a foothold on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The methamphetamine that she was helping to move was, the investigative report described it as 100% pure and sourced directly from Mexican cartels. As a part of that investigation, 2 illegal immigrants were deported, and not for the first time. One had been deported twice before, and the second had been deported 4 times before. As you know, this is a crisis in Indian country, and I want to thank you for your attention to the matter. You had mentioned that in the next 3 to 9 months, 1,500 federal agents and other personnel will be relocated outside of D.C. Across the country. I commend the administration for that. Do you have a sense of how many of those folks, A, will be headed to South Dakota to deal with this crisis, and B, how many will be headed to Indian country in South Dakota to deal with this crisis?
Thank you, sir. I do not have a number for you, and I apologize. The special agents in charge of each division will be getting those FSL or personnel in the forthcoming months. And when they go through their threat review prioritization with their executive management team, they'll determine how many will go to Indian country. So in the case of Billings, that would be our Minneapolis office, and the same with all the other offices.
So as you have a conversation with the folks in that Minneapolis office, because obviously the internal competition for capital will be robust. Every region is going to want more cops on the beat to keep communities safe. I got to ask you, sir, I mean, Pine Ridge and the other reservations in South Dakota, but Pine Ridge, among them, are massive landed reservations with thousands of young people who are worthy of our protection. This meth is poisoning them. And the Mexican drug cartels, as you know, sir, don't give one damn care for the lives of our Native American children or the non-natives in South Dakota. And so to the greatest extent possible, please direct those resources to Pine Ridge and the rest of South Dakota. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield the rest of my time to you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Garris, you know, it's been said that the Mexican government has been very helpful. Have they really been helpful in regards to illegal immigration and this drug problem?
They have, sir, and a good example is, so 2 of our top 10 fugitives were captured by Mexican law enforcement this year alone. It was January and I believe March, don't quote me on the months. That is a massive, that has massive impact and huge success for our collaborative efforts with them.
Let me ask you both this question. Now, I think as Mr. Anderson, you brought up the Tohono O'odhams. Isn't that also a problem because they have basically an open border? And there's been a lot of suppositions about what that tribe has been doing with the cartels. Can you address that it's a possible positive, negative, how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we work hand in hand with the tribe to make sure, what their needs are. There are some cultural issues down there, with putting barriers and different things along the border because it does mess up some of their cultural activities and things down there. So we have to work hand in hand with the tribe to make sure that we're being sensitive of those areas. So we work with the tribe to make sure we're providing whatever resources that we can to make sure that we're keeping those areas safe. And Border Patrol, I know, has worked with them to keep the roads down through there that graded and different things so they can travel along the reservation to patrol those areas as well. So they work hand in hand with the tribe. And then our drug agents, like I say, work hand in hand with the tribal police department to make sure if the tribe has a need or if there's something going on where they have activity across, because they can go back and forth across the border. We keep that intelligence flowing between our agents and the tribal police department, so we address any illegal activity down there.
Mr. Garris, have anything to add to that?
I would just go back to partnership, sir. And I'd like to say that to reiterate what I said in my opening statement, the FBI prioritizes providing support to combat cartels, specifically as it pertains to Indian country. We've increased our Safe Trails Task Force. We have 28 total. That encompasses 500 task force officers across 200 local, state, as well as tribal partners. And then we also have 7 federal partners on that.
Well, you know, the one reason I brought this up is the Tohono O'odham don't believe in their southern border. They believe that that's part of Mexico. And that to me seems like that's kind of a stalwart, kind of a problem that you have to mix up by. Because every time we go to the border down there in the Tohono O'odham area, there's kind of some chaos always going on there. So that's why I brought it up. Because if you have a weak link in it, that seems to be a weak link. Would you agree?
I mean, there's vulnerabilities everywhere, sir. I don't know if I'd single it out on the Tohono O'odham. I would defer to BIA to maybe give more insight to that.
Gotcha. What would you say, Mr.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a weak link. I think there's weak links all along the borders.
Right.
And you know, it's just like a balloon. When you put enforcement in one area, you squeeze it, it's going to go to the next vulnerable area. So I think working hand in hand with the tribe, we reduce and remove those vulnerabilities. And I think the tribe has done a really good job of working hand in hand with the BIA and with Customs and Border Patrol and stuff to remove those vulnerabilities down there.
Thank you. I'm over my time. I'll yield back. I recognize the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to represent over half the tribes in Arizona. I also serve on the House Homeland Security Committee, where just like last week, we talked about the dangerous impact of the Biden administration's radical, inhumane border policies on children who have been trafficked and gone missing. I know that many tribal communities tragically face the murder and disappearance of far too many individuals, a problem that has no doubt been exacerbated by this crisis at the border. Mr. Addington, I'd like to start with you. How is BIA's Office of Justice Services working with tribal law enforcement to combat the flow of illicit drugs in Indian country?
Thank you for that question. Our BIA Division of Drug Enforcement is working hand in hand with tribal law enforcement departments to make sure that we're providing the support to them to address any illicit drug activity that's occurring on their reservations. And we're also doing our mobile enforcement team operations, where we actually go out and work with the tribe and set these operations up to where we come in after we get intelligence and we bring a surge of officers, mainly drug enforcement agents and canine units, to where we go in and we target these areas and we try to disrupt and dismantle these drug organizations that's operating in or around Indian country.
What does that typically look like, sir? Do you guys have monthly conference calls so that you can be up to date with what's going on and what's needed?
So we usually our district offices will usually hear from tribes, and they talk to us about having problems in their areas, and then our Division of Drug Enforcement will usually reach out and start talking to the tribal chief of police, and then we start having that dialogue, and then we set our Met deployments up, start having meetings, start talking about what they want to address. So we just did one at San Carlos. They was having an issue with shots being fired down. I had a lot of gun calls down there. So we actually sent a team down there to not only work on their shooting calls, but also drug activity, different things like that. So we worked with the tribal chief of police. We sent a group down there and done an operation, and those usually can go from anywhere from 3 days, they could go to 2 weeks. The one we just did at Yakima, where we teamed up with the DEA, that operation was like 160 days long. So we sent people in and out of that operation for 160 days, and then we had a drug agent on the ground there locally.
Thank you. In your testimony, you described how drug traffickers often set up distribution operations in proximity to tribal communities by developing close relationships with local tribal residents. How can tribal leaders intervene?
So, and we've talked to tribal leaders a lot about this, and we see tribal leaders now trying to educate, tribal members, because one of the things that happens out there is, if you have a economically diverse location where there's not a whole lot of jobs or anything, these drug cartels will come in and target those vulnerable people. They go find either a young woman or a young man that's vulnerable. They start making contact with them. They give them some money. They start, moving into their houses. Next thing you know, they're set up in their house, and you become a stash house or a house where they're distributing drugs right there on the reservation or nearby. So we try to educate tribal leaders, and tribal leaders are trying to educate tribal members to be on the lookout for this. Just because somebody's trying to offer you something, they may have an alternative motive. Don't just be taking things from somebody unless you know that person.
Is that very often for you guys to see actual stash houses or distribution houses set up on reservations?
Yes, we know routes where the drug trafficking comes up the West Coast, comes across on reservations or stash houses. We get a lot of intel through our Division of Drug Enforcement and DEA where stash houses where they come and stash the drugs, and then it gets distributed on across the whole northern tier of the United States. And it's not just the northern tier, but we see a lot of it coming up the West Coast and going across the northern tier in our northern states that affect a lot of the reservations up there.
Do you guys typically have success with the prosecutions because it's taking place on tribal land, or is it more difficult for you to get successful prosecutions in those cases?
I think it depends on the region that we're in. Most regions are really good at prosecuting, but then you have some regions where you have, where you have border crimes that's occurring, or you have other federal crimes where the workload is really high. So maybe Indian country may not get crimes prosecuted that you might get prosecuted somewhere else just because of the workload.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I'll yield my time to me as well. So now one of the newest phenomena we're starting to see in Arizona is this robbing trains. Mr. Garris, how do you see this playing out, and what kind of resources will you need to utilize or to bring these people to justice?
Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. May you repeat the first part of that?
Yeah, so we see this new phenomenon of robbing trains.
Robbing trains, okay.
And what kind of resources are you looking at, or can it be done within that, or is there something that you need that would be better?
Yeah, my apologies, sir. I have not heard of that yet. We'll continue to work with our partners, both at the local, state, federal, and tribal levels, as well as BIA, to provide added resources, as we always would. If we needed a surge like we are with Operation Not Forgotten, where we've had 60 agents surge to Indian reservations to help combat violent crime, we'll throw more resources to try and mitigate that, sir.
Gotcha. And Mr. Anderson, do you want to add anything?
No, we haven't had any intelligence that's where we've had any of that issue as well up to this point, but I think same thing. We'll work in partnership with our federal partners. We've got a good relationship with all of our other federal, state, local partners and our tribal partners out there. So if we do have a problem, we'll address it as it comes up.
Sounds good. So we had an educational summit here a while back, and one of the Native teachers actually streamlined the process. She said, listen, if you want to put the money in this program, we have the flexibility to use it as we need it, and we're accountable for it. That's streamlining the process. Is there such a program that you're aware of that you have that flexibility but accountability? Start with you, Mr. Addington.
I didn't understand exactly what kind of program are you talking about?
Well, she did education, so there's a lot of different ways they could fund it. But she said this one program gives them the flexibility to do with the money what they needed to do, that it had accountability. Is there such a element for you for financial aspects that you could work for you that way?
I think our 477 program at the Department of Interior is one of the things that the tribes utilize to get funding from multiple different programs. And I think that's one of the things that they would say is the best way for them to get funding to them.
Mr. Garris?
Unfortunately, I don't know of any programs within the FBI, sir, but what I would go back to saying and I'll steal the line from Director Patel, is with more, we can do more. He did meet with the Coalition of Large Tribes last week on the 17th, and similar to what was stated earlier through numerous congressmen and women, as well as my colleague to my right, is they need increased law enforcement present on reservations. They would like more DNA testing. They'd like forensic support, and they'd like increased collaboration regarding missing persons. So, but if we were to have a program where we got more resources, we would definitely utilize it to specifically assist with those requests.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing I'd like to say is the background checks seem to be very, very slow, from the FBI. So is there a way to speed that up? Sure, BIA.
I'd have to coordinate with CGIS to get you an answer on that, sir, so I
Okay.
don't speak out of context.
Well, I want to yield back my time because I went over last time. So we thank the witnesses for your testimony. There may be more questions that'll be asked. We ask you to respond to those in writing, and we'll go to our second panel. So we'll take a 5-minute recess and then get our second panel. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Do you want to go say hi to them?
Yeah. Subcommittee will be re-adjourned. I would like to now introduce our second panel of witnesses. Ms. Stacy Zinn, former resident agent in charge, Rocky Mountain Division, DEA, Billings, Montana. The Honorable Frank White Clay, Chairman, Crow Tribe, Billings, Montana. Mr. Anthony Hillaire, Chairman, Lummi Nation, Bellingham, Washington. Mr. Joshua Roberge, Chief of Police, Fort Belknap Law Enforcement, Fort Belknap, Montana. Let me remind the witnesses we're on a 5-minute schedule, so you'll see the light as you push your button to speak. You'll see the light turn green. That gives you about 4 minutes. Then you'll see it turn yellow. That gives you 1 minute. And then when it turns red, trying to wrap it up. Okay? Just remember your whole testimony will be added to the record. So if you want to ad lib, go to it. Okay? So with that, now I'm going to recognize Ms. Zinn for her 5 minutes.
Thank you. Since 2014, I, Stacy Zinn, have been affiliated with the Native American community located in Montana. I was formerly the resident agent in charge for the entire state of Montana between 2018 through 2023, and prior to that, I was a group supervisor for the Eastern District of Montana. Since mandatory retirement, I have continued to liaison with the Native American community, and I still give free drug and cartel presentations to them for educational purposes. Because I've been a proactive face to some, they will share some things with me pertaining to the happenings taking place on the reservation and the surrounding areas. A topic of contention for the Native American community is their fight against the cartels, foreign gang members, and the drug flow into their communities. This fight is constant due to the overwhelming drug use taking place within their communities. History. When I was transferred to Montana, I learned the Sinaloa cartel had slowly developed relationships with individuals living on the reservation. Cartel members would coordinate with local drug distributors, arrange for shipments of drugs to arrive via ground transportation, and quickly distribute the drugs while picking up bulk currency. Drivers would be rotated after their Montana assignment to keep drug enforcement from being able to identify them. What attracted the cartel to the reservation was the profits that they would make from the sale of drugs compared to the profits they would make in places such as Spokane and Denver. Methamphetamine sales netted an approximate 30% profit, but it wasn't until the fake fentanyl pills came on scene when law enforcement saw the street price skyrocket. The cost to make these pills are approximately 4 cents to 25 cents. For several years, law enforcement has seen fake pills sell as high as $100 per reservation, and they are just seeing the prices drop. With a lack of law enforcement at all levels within the state and huge profits to be made, the cartel started exploiting the Native American community because once one becomes addicted to opiates, it's hard to just walk away from the cartels, and the cartels know this. After the fall of Chapo Guzman, the head of the Sinaloa cartel, the sons, Los Chapitos, took over half of the cartel, while Chapo's longtime partner and former member of the original federation, Ismael Zambada, aka El Mayo, took over the other half. Los Chapitos would bring change to the method of drug trafficking by mailing fentanyl pills to the cities of Montana and then have local distributors distribute to the reservations. However, they took some of the hits from law enforcement after it was able to disrupt some of their activities in southwestern Montana. In 2022, it was learned that a cartel believed to be CJNG was physically moving into the Crow reservation. This relationship was established between the cartel and members of a particular family that traveled between Crow and Washington. After learning of the illegal activities on Crow, I directed my Billings team to focus all their efforts on this investigation, since we had not seen this type of overt actions taking place by the cartels. DEA, along with BIA and FBI, teamed up and started a long-term investigation. The investigation centered on the Crow Indian Reservation, but also impacted Northern Cheyenne Reservation, Fort Belknap Reservation, Rocky Boy Reservation, Flathead Reservation, and the city of Billings. Meanwhile, DEA offices in Washington simultaneously investigated the stash location of the alleged CJNG located near a Washington reservation. Ultimately, Montana's investigation led to 27 convictions. It was learned not only was the cartel providing drugs to the Montana customers, but they were also trading drugs for guns which were transported out of Montana. During the above investigation, Montana law enforcement saw the impact of open borders. Members of the identified Mexican cell consisted of those that had come across illegally over the southwest border, some across to Canada and returned back to the U.S. This is a true scenario where the open borders were allowing crime and illegal substance to flow across the border into our communities, impacting the vulnerable. Since the end of 2024, the Trump administration has been engaged with rectifying the criminal situation within our country, and this has inadvertently impacted Montana's Indian country and has been given more resources to law enforcement. By closing the southwest border and being proactive in targeting illegals with criminal records, law enforcement has been able to actively conduct raids on those that are harming the communities. This has disrupted the normal drug flow into the certain reservations. The recent pressures placed on the Sinaloa's leadership and the vacuum of the CJNG physical presence on the reservations has given the tribal community a much-needed pause. However, this has not completely stopped the flow of drugs because it's already a ravaged area. A lack of law enforcement at both the local and federal levels has still been an ongoing frustration by all those involved. The hiring and methods of BIA candidates is also an issue. Another issue facing the reservations is the lack of jail space. The overcrowding of jails is allowing criminals to continue to walk the streets and in turn is leading to more crime being committed. However, positive actions have been taking place since the current administration has taken place has been the bringing back of former U.S. Attorney Kurt Almy, who knows Montana and Indian country. A strong advocate for wanting to rid the criminal element of the reservation signals to law enforcement to place more emphasis on Indian country. Last, nominating tough-on-crime judges who will impose firm and consistent sentences according to the U.S. sentencing guidelines, which President Trump has recently done, will help combat the soft crime attitudes that we have previously seen. In conclusion, I applaud the Trump administration's current efforts in keeping our community safe. While the cartel, gang members, and foreign bad actors have the current advantage, just knowing that law enforcement has a strong support in the White House is placing a key leadership in agencies that are supporting law enforcement is a huge boost to morale. While there's still more work to be done, I feel that we are heading in the right direction. God bless.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Chairman Whiteclay for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee for the opportunity to appear today. The Crow Reservation, like many other of the tribal lands, has become an unwitting corridor for transnational cartels. Thanking for your attention to the matter and the administration's attention to this matter. We are here seeking partnership to secure our people and uphold our sovereignty. The Psalogat people have inhabited the Yellowstone River Valley in south central Montana. Our reservation was established by treaty in 1851. Today, the Crow Reservation spans approximately 2.4 million acres, a little bit bigger than Connecticut. As elected chairman, I represent over 14,000 members, enrolled members. Key priorities include public safety, economic opportunity, while maintaining cultural preservation. The reservation's vast terrain, remote roadways, and sparse law enforcement presence make it an attractive smuggling route for the cartels. Combined with limited economic opportunities, this creates a perfect storm for the predatory behaviors of cartels and organized crime. Over the past several years, law enforcement has seized record quantities of meth and fentanyl on the Crow Reservation. While meth and fentanyl distribution impacts all of Montana, these drugs continue to disproportionately devastate Indian country. Our people bear the human toll: addiction, violent crime, human trafficking, community trauma. My reservation is ground zero for MMIW. The Crow tribe's funding shortfalls have severely constrained our capacity to secure the reservation and support at-risk families. I have testified before the expedited closure of our mine, coupled with the illegal placement on a do-not-pay list by the previous administration, has negatively impacted our community. The mine's closure significantly increased our unemployment rate and reduced tribal revenue. By unfairly being added to the do-not-pay list, we also lost countless grant opportunities in the millions. The consequences are substantial and multifaceted. Fewer BIA officers on patrol, leading to delayed response times for drugs, weapons. Cuts to the social service programs, increasing vulnerability to cartel recruitment and substance abuse. We have a total of 6 BIA officers in total, with only 2 per day patrolling landmass the size of Connecticut. Cartels are drawn not only to the wide open spaces of our reservation, but also to the void created by the budget limits and desperation caused by joblessness and poverty and lack of law enforcement. With, With more of these processes going through, we have partnered with National Guard to have a presence on our reservation because we don't have law enforcement pressure to deter cartel presence. I want to thank this committee for passing the Crow Revenue Act in a bipartisan manner. Once signed into the law, the Crow tribe will again have the resources needed to protect our people, care for those in need, and invest in economic development. In my term, we have had 80 situations of missing people on which the Crow tribe has funded those search and rescues, and we've rescued 80 people through this term. 56 of them were drug-related and human trafficking. In January of this year, President Trump issued an executive order creating a formal process to designate international cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. FTOs are especially designated global terrorists. This recognizes cartels convergent with insurgent-style state actors and terrorist groups across the Western Hemisphere, and declares their violence, assassinations, and trafficking pose an unacceptable national security risk. This action opened the door for enhanced law enforcement tools, asset freezes on designated entities, and prohibition on all U.S. transactions with FTOs, and expanded authorities of Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You know, there's a lot of talk of with the southern border, but our northern border remains unprotected as we see today. I conclude that leveraging the robust tools and authorizing the executive order and ensuring the Crow tribe and all tribal nations have direct access to these resources, we can stem for and begin to stem the tide of cartel violence, restore safety, and uphold tribal sovereignty, help our people be safe in their own homelands. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Now I recognize Chairman Hillaire for 5 minutes.
Aitzquile, Nisjalachasiam. Good afternoon, my dear friends and relatives. Thank you, Chairman Gosar. Thank you, Ranking Member Dexter, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Satsumton. My name is Tony Hillaire, and I serve as the chairman of the Lummi Indian Business Council, and I appear before you today representing 5,480 Lummi tribal members, and we are signatories of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. I have witnessed the rise in drug-related deaths and overdoses and seen families torn apart by this devastating crisis. There was a time when we held funerals almost every day, and one week in particular, we experienced 5 fentanyl overdoses. And what we are experiencing is genocide by another name. Every lost life is the erasure of future generations, our children, our future elders, future leaders, future fishermen, future cultural bearers. We are targeted because predatory drug dealers along cartels know that in many cases tribes cannot prosecute non-Indians. Even when we manage to get someone arrested, we can't charge or convict them ourselves. We've seen drug dealers walk free and return to our reservation the same day they were taken into custody. And predatory drug dealers in Indian country is not a new problem. Today's fentanyl crisis is simply the latest chapter in a long history of exploitation. While Congress has taken steps to restore tribal jurisdiction in areas like violence against women, drug crimes remain largely beyond our authority. Congress must now extend that same recognition to empower us to prosecute non-Indian drug traffickers and strengthen enforcement to get these fatal drugs off our reservation. In September of 2023, we declared a state of emergency to better address the fentanyl crisis. Our tribal council took bold action. We set up drug checkpoints, used drug sniffing dogs, closed down drug houses, and passed laws to remove dealers and deny bail for drug crimes. And in this work, we learned that when you take strong stances and remove drugs off of the streets, there is an uptick for the need of health care and healing services. So we opened a temporary stabilization center with a 7-bed recovery unit offering detoxing services. We expanded our Healing Spirit opioid treatment program, which offers medication-assisted treatment alongside culturally grounded counseling. And we prioritize community outreach to get those people that are in the vulnerable population and bring them home. We built 40 pallet homes for those most at risk because we know that healing starts with a safe place to sleep. We reopened our Lummi Youth Academy, a dorm room setting for youth at risk. And these efforts were immediate solutions designed to help us while we work toward our long-term goal, establishing a tribal medical detox facility and strengthen our prevention efforts. We received significant funding from IHS and additional state funds to help build this life-saving facility, and we cannot thank them enough for sharing in our dream of healing. And while we are doing everything we can, we know that we can't do it alone. Working with federal partners and local task forces, we seized over 846,000 fentanyl pills, 6 kilograms of fentanyl powder, 7 kilograms of cocaine, and 29 firearms from a trafficking ring, which we traced this operation directly back to the deaths on our reservation. We have no doubt the cartels have played a role in supplying these drugs. Despite these proactive efforts and support, our community remains in constant state of loss and grief, without even enough time to mourn one relative before losing another. Congress has heard this before. There's been 3 major reports: the Not Invisible Act Commission report, the Broken Promises report, and a roadmap for making Native America safer. All reached the same conclusion. Tribal nations need adequate funding, stronger authority, and coordinated federal support. But money alone won't save our people. We believe we need the following: expand special tribal criminal jurisdiction to non-Indian drug dealers. For example, the PROTECT Act, a bipartisan bill recently introduced in the House and the Senate. Expand 638 contracting and compacting, strengthen cross-deputization and collaboration, expand shadow wolves and canine capacity, and treat this issue as a health crisis as well. In addition, and finally, an Associate Attorney General position for American Indians and Alaska Natives at the Department of Justice. And a note to that is also a special attorney to the U.S. Attorney. Any support in getting us that in our own court judicial system would go a long way in our ability to prosecute federally. Thank you for your time, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize Chief Roberge. Is it right?
Roberge.
Roberge, okay. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gozar, members of the subcommittee. My name is Josh Roberge, and I serve as the Chief of Police for the Fort Belknap Indian community. I appreciate the opportunity to testify about our work combating transnational drug cartels. Drug cartels are assaulting our reservations and our families, with chemical warfare. We're suffering from a plague of drug use, violent crime, human trafficking, and sexual abuse. We're easy pickings, along with every other reservation in Indian country. Cartel members blend into these communities, make huge profits, and we lack the law enforcement officers and resources to root them out. Our reservation is in north-central Montana and about 40 miles south of the Canadian border, which is a border we should be paying attention to after the southern border is closed. We're a large land-based tribe, and our reservation is about the size of Rhode Island. Our police force is on the front lines of the war against these drug cartels, but we only have 7 patrol officers, which means about 2 officers per shift, patrolling the reservation the size of a small state, 24/7, 365. We need 4 times the funding and more than double the amount of officers to effectively combat these cartels. Without funding increases and the resources our officers need, we're losing this battle, and this is across Indian country. We invite you to visit any one of these reservations to see these battles firsthand. The Trump administration's focus on law enforcement and border security has helped. Since we last testified about a year ago, we've seen some reduction in the flow of drugs. Drug activity on our reservation has gone down from a severely elevated state because the open border was just flooding Indian country to a more neutral level. A great starting point for this administration. Methamphetamine and fentanyl are still being trafficked, and the cash is still flowing back to Mexico. However, it's in slightly lower quantities. At this time, drug cartels seem to be more isolated to cities and larger towns rather than rural areas. However, our young men and women are still being recruited through social media and interpersonal networks with the promise of getting rich. This promise comes at the grave cost of never getting out of the game or death. Recruitment is easy on Indian reservations like ours, where unemployment rates are very high. Our unemployment rate is about 30%. We're in a rural and remote area with few economic development opportunities. No opportunities means that our youth turn to drugs and dangerous lifestyles to earn a living. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act should have included funding for tribal law enforcement to fight these cartels. The act included about $170 billion for immigration and border enforcement. At this rate, Congress could have doubled the funding for tribal law enforcement, which would have been a drop in the bucket for the federal budget, and it would have made a huge impact in all of Indian Country. Instead, tribal law enforcement got left behind. In the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you're only able to apply for grant funding under the Operation Stone Garden program, and we can't effectively combat these transnational cartels and run a law enforcement program on grant funding. We need increases to the base funding so that we can hire more officers and maintain the resources that they need. You're hearing the same thing, boots on the ground, directly engaging with these guys. We're shocked to see that President Trump's proposed budget for fiscal year 26 included a $107 million decrease in tribal law enforcement funding, and we're thankful to the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee did not go with the President's proposal and instead approved a $221 million increase, and we ask that the full Congress approve this funding. We also need full funding for law enforcement 638 contracts under the Indian Self-Determination Act. In 1997, the BAA provided $1.2 million for us to administer law enforcement under a 638 contract. In 2023, 27 years later, BAA has only increased this amount to $1.3 million. This is an increase of $100,000, give or take, over 27 years. The subcommittee should use its oversight authority to investigate this underfunding for law enforcement contracts. Finally, we need to fix law enforcement jurisdiction in Indian Country. Over the past 100 years, Supreme Court rulings and laws passed by Congress have made jurisdiction on Indian reservations too complicated. The drug cartels know this, and they know that they can slip through the cracks with law enforcement in Indian Country. Congress must restore full tribal criminal jurisdiction over Indian reservations so we can arrest anybody that breaks the law. Congress should pass the PROTECT Act of 2025. Drug use and violent crime go hand in hand. The act would restore tribal criminal jurisdiction over certain crimes and provide important tools for us to combat threats from the cartels, traffickers, and other violent and drug-related offenders that target Indian reservations. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to answering any questions you all may have.
Thank you very much. Now, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Baumgartner, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a privilege to be here on this Natural Resources Subcommittee on Oversight Investigations examining the Trump administration's work combating transnational cartels in Indian Country. I appreciate the opportunity to wave onto the committee today. Your testimony was extremely important. I hope there are many members of the media listening and reporting on what is going on in Indian Country with this scourge of drugs, particularly fentanyl. I care about this issue not just because I have multiple reservations in my district in Eastern Washington, but also on a personal level. I grew up very near the Nez Perce Reservation and played basketball for 2 years as a youngster out of Lapway and have connections there. But regardless whether you have connections in the country or not, every American should care about this issue. As I said, I represent much of Eastern Washington, from Colville and the Canadian border, Colville area and Canadian border in the north, down to the Walla Walla area, Oregon in the south. Like many communities, we are blue-collar, hardworking folks, people trying to do the right thing. Before I was elected to Congress, I took a trip down to the southern border during the Biden administration. While I was there, I saw illegal immigrants brazenly entering the country. The lawlessness was staggering. Drug cartels are a scourge in our country and our communities. Despite what critics of tough immigration enforcement might argue, these thugs are a real threat that often live uncomfortably close to home. I have a few examples of how these notorious criminal organizations like Tren de Aragua, MS-13, and the 18th Street Gang often target federal lands in Indian Country to hide and sell drugs in our communities. Just last week, a Mexican native drug trafficker was sentenced to 19 years in prison for an arrest where federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement officers seized 161,000 fentanyl pills, approximately 80 pounds of methamphetamine, approximately 6 pounds of heroin, more than 2 pounds of cocaine, and 12 firearms. Investigators believe these drugs and firearms were destined for the Colville Indian Reservation, partially in my district and nearby. This thug was a high-ranking member of a trafficking group that had infiltrated parts of Washington, Montana, and nearby tribal reservations. This case involved one of the largest drug seizures ever in rural Washington, and this is not an isolated incident. In Yakima, Washington, just this month, 13 individuals, at least some of whom were criminal aliens, were charged or pleaded guilty to offenses related to trafficking fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana on the Yakima Nation Reservation in the state. The Joint DEA and Bureau of Indian Affairs operation, which concluded June 2025, seized over 7,000 pounds of marijuana, over 300 pounds of methamphetamine, nearly 25 pounds of cocaine, 7 pounds of fentanyl powder, nearly 5,000 fentanyl-laced pills, over $22,000 in drug proceeds, and 12 firearms. Now, I don't know about any of you here today, but when I read these statistics, I say this is a public emergency. Let me be clear, we're at war with drugs lords and traffickers in our communities. To criminals and drug traffickers, you need to be arrested. You will be arrested, prosecuted, and held accountable. I will do everything, and I know members of Congress will do that, make sure of it. To people walking back home, if you see something, if you say something, I am proud that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act secured a historic $165 billion in funding for border security, including completion of the southern border wall, hiring and equipping thousands of additional Customs and Border Protection officers and Immigration and Customs Enforcement personnel, launching and operating new border surveillance technologies, expanding criminal alien detention capacity, and increasing coordination among federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. This legislative victory builds upon other key congressional achievements during the 119th Congress, such as passing the Lake and Riley Act, which mandates federal detention of illegal immigrants charged with theft, burglary, assaulting a law enforcement officer, and any crime, death, or serious bodily injury. The law is named in honor of a Georgia nursing student who was murdered by an illegal alien previously arrested and paroled in the United States. I also support legislation like H.R. 3773, the PROTECT Act, to empower local law enforcement on Indian reservation to arrest and imprison these thugs. There's a lot more work to do, but I appreciate the work of this committee and those that called in to testify today. And I just want to say on a personal level, your concerns are being heard, and I very much appreciate the work you're doing to unite this Congress, both Republicans and Democrats together to deal with this issue. Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentlelady from Oregon is now recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I echo my colleagues' sentiments here that this is an issue that I believe is bipartisan in our desire to address. And I would also just reiterate that this is the 4th time that we've asked our tribal partners to come and testify, and yet we continue to cut your funding. So on that, I just want to say that we cannot just be words. We have to truly partner. And Mr. Hillaire, I appreciate, or Chairman Hillaire, I'm sorry, I appreciate your so clearly outlining what you are looking for in our in your testimony. That's extremely helpful. The chronic underfunding of tribal communities, despite our trust and treaty obligations, is clearly a broken promise in my mind. And the grant funding programs that Mr. Roberge, I think, really spoke to, may be great opportunities, but my guess is that you don't have the resources to competitively apply for those resources. So I just want to ask you to please describe how you would use full funding for law enforcement in particular, and acknowledging that you've outlined it, just give you an opportunity to really highlight what the most important aspects of your testimony are, and why culturally appropriate and competent law enforcement is important on our tribal nations.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I do just want to reiterate that and agree. Our perception and our understanding of treaty and trust responsibility is not just applying for a grant, especially competitively. We don't want to compete against our brothers and sisters across Indian country to get the services and the work that's needed and what was promised to us in the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. And so that's one portion of it, and that's why this idea and this concept of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act is needed. There's some much needed expansion of self-governance across various agencies in government. And to go to your question, I think that includes Department of Justice, the Homeland Security, and so on, because it doesn't just sit within one agency or one program or one federal opportunity that we have to get what we need to take care of our people and address the serious issues that we face. And so if we were to have the full funding for, at least for us at Lummi Nation, we have our own courts and judicial system, and that's why I brought up the special attorney to the U.S. attorney to have the ability to prosecute federally within our own judicial system would go a long way. And then also having full capacity of our enforcement officers. We become a training ground for officers that come in and are new, and we don't have competitive wages or retirement to other local jurisdictions around us. And so they come in and learn Lummi law, they learn local ordinances, they learn state law, and then they learn federal law, and then they move on to what's next. And so that's a huge issue. And then also what we learned in addressing the immediate overwhelming amount of fatal overdoses is the importance of drug checkpoints to slow down the amount of traffic of drugs on a reservation. And with that, it was a tremendous help to have our own canine unit team there to help with that work. And then not necessarily, it's indirectly impacted by funding, is the support from the BIA agents and FBI in our region. It's very limited, and it took constant calls and meetings to be able to have enforcement BIA agents on our reservation to do these much needed drug interdictions. And in our debrief, it was stated from them and the DEA that the solution is to keep doing them, but then we're going to wait until more people die, or are we going to have a plan in place that is needed so we can do it more regularly, and that does take funding.
No, I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, I want to acknowledge we don't have very much time left, but I would really appreciate highlighting the importance of having culturally competent folks investing time and funding and treatment for addiction and recovery, and you spoke to the desire to bring that to the Lummi Nation, and so I was wondering if you could extrapolate or expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So we're doing a full court press, and in addressing the fentanyl crisis and getting drugs off of the street, we saw just overwhelming amount of individuals that wanted to seek help and address addiction and address cycles of trauma and cycles of abuse. And so with that, we have done everything we can to prioritize these much needed services. The stabilization facility, we're building a secure withdrawal management and stabilization facility, otherwise known as Detox, just opened a state-of-the-art tribal health care facility. And all of these healing health services have culture at the very, very core and center of it, our way of life, our teachings, our values, and that's integrated throughout everybody's journey to wellness, their pathway, because everybody's pathway is different, but having our culture at the very center of it has really, really shown us our ability to take care of ourselves.
No, I very much appreciate that, and I'll acknowledge, Mr. Chair, that I went over a bit. I just want to elevate the importance of building a healthcare system that is not just impactful but sustained, and that we need to meet our treaty obligations and have that reliable funding for that to happen. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Emily. Okay, Ms. Zinn. Many years ago, the BIA led a cross-agency annual Indian country drug threat management talks that talked about the incoming drug-related threats coming to Indian country. Do you think there's room for this to be done again?
Absolutely.
How would you run it? And where would you run it from?
Where would I run it?
No, where would you run it from? You know, like from the FBI, or who would coordinate this?
That is a very good question. I would not give it to the FBI because of all the other responsibilities that they have. I think it'd be too overloaded. I would not give it also to DHS because they're also a big agency that has a lot of other taskings. If we're going to be specific, I would look more at DEA because that's their wheelhouse is drugs, cartels, money laundering. I would consider that, and also partnership with BIA because BIA, this is what they do. So if you have team effort, I would do like a mini task force.
And how many times did you conduct it in a year's time?
I beg pardon?
How many times did you conduct that assessment, sharing of assessment? Would it be weekly, monthly, daily?
If it was for example, if I was running it, I would absolutely do it either monthly or less, because everything is free-flowing, meaning with the changes that are taking place on the border, then the landscape's going to change. When things are going to shift in Canada, like we're seeing right now, then you're going to have to start staying on top of it. So you start off at a quicker response, and then if you're seeing that there's no changes, then you spread it out more so.
That's interesting. Chairman Hillaire, I'm kind of mesmerized by your comments about a U.S. attorney and attorney general. How would that work? Who would they respond to, and how would that influence anything on sovereignty?
Yeah, so I think that's the discussion that needs to happen, is because we had a prosecutor at Lummi Nation that we were told in meetings with some of the federal agencies that have the qualifications to become a special attorney to the U.S. attorney. I don't know if that's been done across Indian country, but I think if we have our own judicial system in place, we have our own enforcement, we know where the drug homes are, we know where like the trafficking on our reservation, I believe that there's an opportunity there for us to be able to partner with the federal government, whereas we've already heard it from some of the other testimony where there's capacity issues in the federal agency, and in some of the federal agencies, and so if we can help in that burden to tear down some of these bureaucracies and prosecute at our level at Lummi Nation, then we believe it would really help.
So let me flesh out a little bit more. So would this be one person for all the tribes? I don't speak for other tribal nations, but for Lummi Nation, yes. But that's the conversation that needs to happen, because there's over 500 federally recognized tribes. Right,
so
right.
How that would look in various regions as well.
Yeah.
Needs to be fleshed out.
So would it apply to corporate law as well? Because I mean, some of the tribes are corporations, not really tribal entities. Alaska.
I'm not sure. I think that's, again, a discussion that we need to have.
Well, I think and why I'm asking these questions, I think this is an intriguing idea. But beauty's in the detail, you know, and so it would be very interesting. Chief, one last question for you. Do you like the idea that he's come up with?
I could get behind it. The issue is we definitely need more U.S. attorneys.
Yeah.
You have more agents, right? You plus up the agents in these areas, it's still going to get bottlenecked at the U.S. Attorney's Office unless you have more attorneys. Their workload is insane. FBI and Indian countries' workload's insane. I mean, you need attorneys to prosecute that in federal court. Those are the only people that could touch them guys, because we can't tribally. So I could get behind everything Chairman Hillaire is saying.
One real quick question. Would you agree with that, that the first question I asked Ms. Zinn, that the DEA sharing would be something that would be appropriate for you on a daily basis? I mean, we have technology now, so we can do things internet-wise, and that would be one way of bringing in some technology to Indian country that is secure.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. The more we know about stuff coming in, the better off we're at about interdicting that stuff. Most of the time, it's a luck game. You run traffic, you luck out, you stop a car that is carrying a load of drugs or humans, what have you. The more that we involve technology and we share information, the better off everybody else is. And this goes across the United States in general, not just Indian country.
Thank you. I'm going to yield to the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Dow, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for once again allowing me to weigh in on this committee. And thank you for the witnesses for being here. Appreciate it. You know, the threat posed by international cartels to tribal communities is significant and growing. According to the DEA, drug overdose deaths in the U.S. exceeded 112,000 in 223, with synthetic opioids like fentanyl being the primary driver. And Montana is not immune. The Montana Department of Justice reports a 1,000% increase in fentanyl seizures in the state since 2019. And on many reservations, law enforcement is stretched thin. Cartels take advantage of these gaps and fuel addiction, violence, human trafficking, and Native communities who already experience violent crime at a rate over twice the national average are affected more than most. So recent federal actions have made a difference, but the scale of the problem demands urgent, sustained attention. I welcome all of your insights and recommendations for ensuring that tribal communities have the resources and the support they need to push back against these criminal threats. I'm going to start with Chairman Whiteclay. Given the challenges that your community has faced with cartels moving into tribal land, how can new legal authorities, like the recent designation of cartels as a foreign terrorist organization, help your tribe protect itself?
Thank you, Congressman. Always good to see you. Yeah, it opens up a whole new toolbox for us to be able to utilize those designations. And like we said, we've had to come up with creative ways to combat the cartels. And I appreciate your support on that with the Montana Air National Guard to be able to patrol on the reservation and do the trainings there. Like we said, with the new designations, it opens up more tools for us and leads to more prosecutions and more arrests, because then they have that designation where they don't have safe havens. And that's what reservations primarily are safe havens, because of the jurisdictional quagmire that's there. And leading to Chairman Hillaire's process of having tribes have their own U.S. attorney to be able to prosecute, because we don't have the jurisdiction to prosecute. Once we utilize these tools in there, we need that next step there. But with the Trump administration putting these designations out, it greatly increases the tribe's toolbox to be able to utilize and find ways to curb the cartel tide.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to move to you, Chief. Your testimony highlights that just 7 officers are responsible for patrolling an area the size of Rhode Island. With high unemployment, limited economic opportunity, recruiting and retaining officers is a challenge while cartels continue to prey on local youth. So what would you recommend as the most effective federal support to break this cycle?
Well, Mr. Downing, increase the numbers of boots on the ground in all of Indian country. This administration so far is off to a great start. You look at the last 4 years, it's been insane. Everything was just flooded. With methamphetamine and fentanyl comes this huge increase in violent crime and human trafficking. This administration's focus on, it's like taking the gloves off. There's more focus at the U.S. Attorney level, at the investigative level for the FBI and the DEA. Everybody's focused on illegal immigrants, drug trafficking, and transnational cartels.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm move to you, Ms. Zinn. From your extensive experience, what have you seen work best when it comes to interagency partnerships or legislative tools to disrupt cartel networks in rural Indian country?
It has to be a team effort. All boots on the ground, BIA, HSI, DEA, FBI, everyone has to do a full court press. On top of that, though, we have to have the other side of the piece. You have to have education, and we need to also start bringing the whole team together, building relationships with the tribal community in order to combat this. Law enforcement can fix the reservations from the outside in. The Native American community can help fix them with the inside out.
Are there gaps in resources or policies that you would urge Congress to address right away?
Absolutely. I mean, looking at the funding for BIA is definitely one of them. Also, with the safe trails, that's just now being developed. We need to hyper-focus on those, get these agents into these task force groups, but we need to bring outside help into, for example, Montana, because if you're pulling agents from the different offices in Montana, then there's going to be a huge operation gap. So you got to bring more resources, more agents to the communities that impact the reservations.
Unfortunately, I've run out of time. I really appreciate all of your input, and on that, Mr. Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. The gentleman yields back. There's lots of interest here, so I think you're going to get lots of questions from the members here. We ask that you respond to those kindly in 10 working days. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following articles. The first is Washington Post article about the drop in fentanyl seizures at the border. It says the decline started before Trump took office in January. The second is a fact sheet from the Department of Homeland Security, which dispels the myth that open borders are at fault. It says more than 90% of interdicted fentanyl is stopped at the ports of entry, where cartels attempt to smuggle it, apparently in vehicles driven by U.S. citizens. So I appreciate it if we could get those in. Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered. Well, without further ado, we're going to adjourn. Thank you very much, and thanks for the witnesses for coming. Appreciate it.